Yeah, so it's good evening and good morning. Oh no, good evening and good afternoon. Rosebell Abwonji, thank you very much for joining us all the way from Cambridge. Welcome to the Boots on the Ground podcast. It's been a long time coming. Karibu sana to the show.
Thank you, Diplex. Very happy to be here and looking forward to having an interesting conversation with you.
Thank you, Rosebell. We just dive right into the conversation, Rosebell. I'm curious. Could you take us back? Like, who is Rosebell Abwonji? Where did you grow up, go to school, and how did your childhood shape the person that you are today?
All right, that's a good question. The beginning, very beginning. I grew up in Nairobi, Kenya. That's where I was born and raised. So I consider myself a city girl. Um, Grew up in Nairobi, enjoyed my time there, and studied there, went to university there, and then as I progressed on in my professional career, I eventually found myself moving and going to live in Narok, which is really where my journey with conservation began. Traditionally, I wouldn't say I am a conservationist by traditional sense, in the sense that it was not what I went to school to study. Um, at heart, I consider myself a writer. That's what makes my heart beat and race. But then, as I continued with my educational pursuits, I found myself studying business and getting into marketing for one reason or the other. And for a sense and for a while, that was where I started off my professional career. And with time, I tend to be a very restless individual. If you know me well, you know that I get bored really, really quickly. So I was chronic in the sense that in less than a year, at most 2 years, I was always changing jobs because I was always trying to find something that would make me pause and would make me feel like I was doing something meaningful. And so I made a lot of changes in my career, moving on from marketing to administration to operations, until I eventually, and I say this openly, I found myself getting into conservation purely by accident. Somebody sent a job advert on WhatsApp, happened to be a friend of my sister, pestered me to apply for it. I did not think I was qualified at all to get that job. So I mostly just applied for the job because I wanted to get somebody off my back, not because I thought that I would get it. You know, you apply for something and you're like, at least I can tell you I applied for it. Just leave me alone now.
Yeah.
And then I applied for it, and to my shock and surprise, I got called for interviews, and I succeeded, and I managed to get a job, and that's really where my journey in conservation began. And my life changed forever from that point on, I would say.
Wow, that's very interesting, and thank you. Purely by accident, but look at you right now. I mean, you've managed to create a very huge impact as a woman in conservation, and we're going to chat about that in a bit. But I'm curious, what were you writing about when blogging? I'm assuming this was the time when blogging was a thing. Could you please make us understand like what was your writing about, and now that you got this job in conservation in the Mara, and you're a city girl, how was it adjusting to the life here? And this is Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancy Association, right?
Yeah, yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Could you please
Uh,
tell us more about that?
well, as a writer, I don't necessarily consider myself a blogger. I feel like that's a very confined way of describing how I write. So as a child, I've always been curious, and I've always turned to books and stories as a way of expression, and also as a way of easing my mind, especially when I'm overwhelmed or when I'm feeling like I need to process things. So stories plays a central role in who I am. And as a child, I loved reading, and that made me also want to write, because I wanted to write as well as some of the authors that I was reading, and that took me down different pursuits. So a fun fact is that in high school, I was actually quite popular in high school because I used to write like a series of novels. I was in boarding
Wow.
school, and I had had nothing else to do. So I was writing a series of novels, and like everyone in the school would always just be waiting for, I'd scribble down in an exercise book, and everyone would be waiting for the exercise book. And during prep time, you have people coming and going like, where is this book? So there's like a whole distribution channel happening for some time. So up to now, a lot of people who are in high school with me I think, are deeply disappointed that I'm not a published author as yet. But writing is just something that I do, and it tends to change with time. Sometimes I'm interested in fictional pieces. Sometimes I want to write something very reflective. Sometimes I want to write something very serious. So I take writing as where it leads me. To your second question about
Yes.
my time in moving to Narok, I was working with Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association, MMWCA. That was such a big transition. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't know what I was getting myself into, because I think if I did, I would have been a bit afraid. I wasn't quite prepared for the cultural shifts and the changes that was coming with it. For me, it was really just getting another job, and I didn't think too much about it. But then having to move to a different town, having to settle there, really taking the time to understand the people and the culture. That was a big learning curve for me. And I think the entire time that I was there, I never really stopped. Even up to now, I wouldn't say that I'm 100% comfortable, or I can lay claim and say that I fully understand the Ma culture. I think I'm far from it. It was just a continuous learning journey for me. And in a sense, that has been a really good experience for me. It has grounded me, because even now, as I have moved out of Kenya, and now that I'm situated in Cambridge, a lot of the lessons that I picked from that season in my life are the things that I apply now, because now I'm interacting still with other different cultures, with people from different backgrounds, and taking my time to really understand who they are and where they're from, and the little nuances in different cultures that come.
Thank you, Rosebell. And you had a long stint, almost 10 years or over at MMWCA. And I'm
It
curious
was
to know,
7 years.
7 years. Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
did that connection to land, community, women, and the approach to conservation at MMWCA influence the way you approach conservation today?
Okay, that's a good question. To begin with, women, one, just because I'm a woman, it's one of the things that I deeply care about. Even before I joined the MMWC, I was always an advocate for women's rights, and that comes from my upbringing, with my mother, seeing a lot of the things that my mother would do, and a lot of the ways my mom would show up for other women in her life and support them and take care of them. So it's always been something that's been planted deep in me, to really care about women's rights in different spaces, and make sure that they are vocal, and that they're able to be seen, and that they're able to speak for themselves. Conservation in itself is something that I've really grown deeply to care about, and that has been a privilege for me, having worked with the Maasai community, and being able to stay very closely with the people from there, being able to be taught by them, to help me understand their experiences and what they're going through the day-to-day basis. I think just being situated in that space and seeing all the challenges and all the opportunities that lie for them was an exceptional experience. There were days when I felt like my heart was breaking, because you would see something that's completely horrific and completely unjust, and you really begin to understand the dynamics of how systems are created in a way that can completely disallow some people and some communities from fully participating. And then at the same time, there was also a lot of beauty in that experience, really understanding the coexistence of the community with wildlife in that space, and how they cared for it, and the role that it plays for them, and the significance and the culture. That was such a beautiful experience as well. So, being getting the privilege to just live and see all of this full front made me understand the depth of what conservation meant, not necessarily in the most scientific or technical component, but more on the human coexistence side of it. And having being a woman, being able to see the limitations that women had in being able to participate in that space really drew my focus on that, as well as the youth, because I interacted quite a bit with the youth, and I still do. So those are really special places for me, when I think about conservation with local communities.
Thank you, Rosebell. And we'll get into the youth and storytelling in a bit. Women make up less than 10% of conservancy membership, and land ownership is one of the biggest barriers to their entry in terms of participation and hands-on approaches. And they make up less than 5% of conservancy managers and committee members, and largely, you know, the conservancy model in the Mara and how it's run. We have the conservancies, over 27 right now, privately managed, and and MMWCA being the umbrella body. Um, was this something that you fought to understand and to bring to the forefront in your day to day, or what were some of the things that you are putting into place, or some of the policies, some of the conversations that you're having at ground level, in various fora, to ensure that women have a voice as a woman?
That's a good question. Let me think about how to answer it well. In terms of policies, there were opportunities to present policies. One, because at the time my role was centered around human resource. So in human resource, then I was able to focus internally within the organization and address as an organization and as an entity, because you can't be preaching about gender when inside your house you're not practicing it. So then the first step was really to look internally and analyze as an organization, what are we doing to attract and retain more women. So one of the things that we started to do was to become more intentional about recruiting more women staff and creating an environment that was supportive of women staff. Unfortunately, for a lot of organizations situated in the Mara, given the fact that it's so remote, housing tends to be a huge challenge. It's not suitable for a lot of women to be able to stay there for security reasons. Maybe you're married, or you're in a relationship and it's quite a distance and it's far. Some of these considerations that people don't really pay attention to. And as we were constructing our offices in the Mara, I had the opportunity to speak to a number of people based in the Mara, and it's interesting what came up from some of those conversations. Some organizations decided to handle the difficulty of having women in the Mara by simply not hiring women at all and saying, oh, it's such a pain to have women because you have to have all these considerations, so we just won't hire them, and we will focus on having women in another location, which is sad because it still does limit how women can participate in that space. Other women I spoke to would openly tell me the moment that they got pregnant, then their job just ended, because nobody wants to start catering for a woman who has a small baby to nurse and take care of in a remote place. So you find that they'll come up with a creative excuse for you not to continue working. So these were some of the things that sat heavy with me as we were constructing our facilities and our offices. And I'm happy with what we were able to construct, because we're able to construct modest housing, not the most lavish, but suitable enough for women to live there, for men to live there. And that was reflected in the amount of women that we were able to recruit during that time. And I believe up to now, there's still a number of women still working for the organization. So first, being able to create the facilities and the environment where women could step in place. And second, also now starting to really advocate and look for ways that women could take on leadership roles. How could they become more visible? How could they make more decisions? And that was a more comprehensive look internally within our staff members, looking at our board governance as well. We were able to get our first chair lady, which was amazing, and it was incredible. And also, I think within the Conservancies Council, we were able to change the constitution and have women co-opted into the constitution, which at least allowed that each conservancy had to represent a woman representative to be able to attend the AGMs and be able to vote and make decisions. So some of those shifts and changes in being able to increase the visibility and representation of women was good. But I'll take it a step further and say that it wasn't a perfect approach on my side. I've had a lot of time to reflect on this, and I've also had a lot of regrets on some of the steps that I took during that time, simply because now I'm able to recognize that a lot of the things that I took were impositions of what I wanted. It wasn't necessarily a perfect co-creation or consultative process,
Okay.
which I think the process would have benefited more from. I think I should have taken more time to consult with the women, really understand what they want, and let them be more in lead, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm Rosebell and I have the authority and the mandate to do all of this, so let me just rush with it and make these decisions. I think that was very wrong of me. I think it could have benefited from me being more, taking a slower approach and being a lot more consultative, so that it was not a Rosebell thing being driven, but it was more women from the Mara driving that conversation, and taking ownership for it.
Well, that's very, very profound what you've mentioned about just going to the ground, going to the women, going to the communities and listening to them first before you bring in the solutions. And kudos to you really for allowing that and for advocating for that and for ensuring that you did your small bit, even if it wasn't perfect. You did your small bit. Let's switch on gears and talk a bit about storytelling. Conservation education is really wanting in the landscape because you're talking about a young population, 35 under 35, who are the next generation of landowners, are the next generation of researchers, rangers in the Mara around Kenya. And storytelling is central to your work, Rosebell. Why is it such an important tool in environmental conservation and creating cultural resilience and bringing such these issues to young people and making them inspiring their hearts and minds through storytelling? Why is it such an important tool in our modern age right now?
I think storytelling is a perfect tool to connect with people and to really encourage shifts in how we approach problems and situations. When I am looking at conservation and I look at conservation from different approaches, whether it's creating policies, whether it is doing research and all of these things are all very valid. But I find that sometimes they're also very elitist in who can access this kind of information. It's not readily accessible to so many people. Not everyone can access a journal. Not everyone is going to read a policy paper and be able to understand it. So there are wonderful, beautiful, significant things that are being done in conservation. And when I ask myself how I can contribute to that, I find that I lean towards storytelling, perhaps because, again, from a childhood perspective, I've always loved a good story. And I've seen that when you're able to tell a good story, it engages everyone. Everyone will be able to listen to you. Everyone will be able to understand what you're saying. And so storytelling for me is a format that I'm deeply curious about pursuing, because I believe that that's the way to create conversations that need to be had in the conservation space. It's a tool that gives voice to people who may not necessarily be able to write that scientific paper and may not necessarily be able to attend a COP and speak up. But when you provide storytelling, then there's a world of imagination that you can create that gives voice to so many people who tend to be invisible, but actually play a very big role in preserving the environment as we have it today.
Thank you very much for sharing. And how can we unlock more opportunities for storytelling, especially in ways that young people, women, youth can have an avenue where they can, bring in their voice. We can have even the church leaders bringing in their input, talking of nature, taking care of nature, being stewards, and the mandate that we are given, for example, by God, take care of creation, and procreate and fill the earth, and that sort of mandate. Like, how can we have a holistic approach to storytelling so that it's not just the conservationist job to preach and to share these stories, but also it's everyone's cup of tea? Like, we're talking about these things on a dinner table, we're talking about these things with our friends over Christmas, we're talking about these things, it's normal, it's a lifestyle. How can we get to that point where it's not just left for policymakers, for conservationists, for people who care about nature, but it becomes everyone's business?
Business, yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question. There are many layers to approaching to it. One, I believe in telling a good story. Tell a story that people are looking for and people will connect with. A lot of the time, issues with storytellers that storytellers have is that you want to tell your story. You want to tell what you think is a good idea and what connects with you. You don't really check to see, is my audience really connecting with this? Is this really, am I telling it in a way that they'll be able to grasp and understand? So, one, I think it's really understanding your audience. Who are you curating this message for? And is it something that they want to hear? And what kind of emotions, what kind of values, what kind of story do you really want to convey and tell in that space? And then the second thing is how to tell it. What format are you going to say it in? If you're going to create something and put it on some certain platforms, international platforms, you might find that if your audience is the people in the village, but you put it on an international platform that requires a subscription, that requires payment, again, you're cutting them off. They're not going to be able to participate in that. So you need to ask yourself, if my audience is, the people in the Kijiji, the people in the village who I really, really want to be able to get this message, how can I share this story with them in a way that they will grasp it and the way that they will be able to access it? And then another thing I think that we are increasingly lacking as a society in whole is imagination. And this might perhaps be the influence of technology and convenience and having a lot of things at the touch of our buttons, but we're lacking imagination in how we create stories, in how we share them, in what we want to say. We are not thinking outside the box, and we really need to be able to do that and to think about that in a fun way. I believe in having fun when you're doing storytelling. So always have fun when you're doing these things, but do it in a spontaneous, fun way that people will be able to connect with. And when I'm talking to communities, then a prominent thing for me has become language as well, because a lot of the time people don't connect with a story because of language barriers. And we live in a day and time where there's so many resources available to be able to convey language in a way that someone will understand. I think when I was younger, I didn't appreciate the significance of language as much as I do now. Now I appreciate the weight that language carries and what you're able to say in language and how that can be conveyed to somebody else and how seriously they will take it, as opposed to you saying it in a foreign language where somebody has to translate it and think about it and be like, not the message doesn't really settle in with them. So I think being able to say it in a language that somebody speaks and understands, and also allowing them to say their story in their language in a way that they are able to fully express themselves, is a very powerful approach that more people need to embrace in
Certainly,
sharing the
certainly
stories.
agree.
Yeah.
Certainly agree. Thank you very much for sharing that. And many global initiatives often talk about inclusivity, including indigenous knowledge, including local voices, but they often fail to center those local voices in their storytelling on the types of comms that they're driving. How do we move from token inclusion to genuine collaboration, to working hand in hand with the players, with the people on the ground, with the communities, with the people who really matter, and not having a mission arc or sort of comms a strategy that often this is the message we are driving. If you bring a story that's not aligned with what we want to show our donors or what we want to show the public, then it's not going out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you, because even in just what you've described, then there is no inclusion in that process, right? Because the control still sits with the person who is dictating all these terms in telling you that the story must align with this, and this is the message that we are trying to send. So the power hasn't shifted. And you're talking about inclusion, you're really looking at the power dynamics and who is holding it and who is able to make the decisions. So inclusion for me is a very complicated space. And I'm getting to a point of acceptance where I believe as a society we might not ever be able to fully attain full inclusion, because inclusion just has so many layers, not just about indigenous communities. You're also looking at gender, you're looking at race, you're looking at sex, you're looking at so many different things. And when you put all these little tiny layers together, it's really hard to make everybody happy. And I think sometimes in space, that's what we need to accept, that to attain full inclusion is difficult, and perhaps it's always going to be an ongoing process. There's no end journey, there's no final destination. It's always going to be something that's continuously evolving. Um, Looking at how inclusion can be made better, for me, one is looking at people who are intentional about really shifting the power and letting local communities and letting indigenous people speak up for themselves and actually make the decisions. So one of the things that I enjoyed when I was working at MMWCA was seeing an organization run by people from the community, being able to say, oh, the CEO is from the community, and I could see how the landowners would come together and make decisions and elaborate and discuss. And now that I'm away from the Mara, and I've come to other landscapes, I'm very surprised because I realize, oh, this is not a common thing that happens everywhere. It's actually quite rare. Not everyone is making decisions in this way. So really allowing local communities to make the decisions for them, to speak, to co-produce, having donors giving long-running funding, not just funding that's going to be for a short program for a month or 2 months or a year. Sometimes you get funding that's really short and comes with so many requirements that you have to do. And in essence, changes the systems and the structures that an organization should be shaped around. We worked with different donors who sometimes would tell us, oh, you have to come up with policies, you have to do all of these things. And at the bottom of it, when you look at doing all of these things, there's really, what they're conveying is that there's really no trust, right? Because they're saying, we are not really sure you know how to spend our money. And in the process of them saying that, you also realize, oh, we don't actually have enough manpower to be able to implement all these policies because it's so much administrative work. So then you start thinking, oh, we need to hire like 3 more people. But of course, they don't want to fund you to hire 3 more people. What they want you to do is to keep working more and more and more to be able to fulfill all these little tiny processes and policies that they are beginning to introduce. And that sometimes can be a headache and really conveys a lack of trust when you're always reporting, when you're always adding on policies, and you're always just checking every little small tiny thing. It really inhibits the work that you're able to do, because then what you're doing is that you're forcing this community to get away from their organic self, from their authentic self, and start shaping themselves around systems and structures that have been dictated by the Western world. Again, there is no authenticity, there is no collaboration, there's no inclusion in that process. You've not really sat down to hear from them and ask them how they do their work and how they approach things, and try to define the system with them and see how can we create it in a way that works for everyone. I think there's also a lot of discussion to be had around representation of local people, because you've talked about tokenism, which is true. I find that sometimes when we're making some of the decisions, we are happy with a certain level of visibility, but we don't really want to hand the mic to someone and say, speak, right? So you're happy with inviting some people to the room, and as long as they're dressed in some certain attire and you can take, all these glamorous photos and say, oh, we've flown these people in and look, we are being representative, then you've ticked the box. But then the moment they actually sit down and start navigating those really difficult, tense discussions, they start talking about land rights, when they start talking about some historical injustices, then everybody gets very squeamish, and all of a sudden you want to take the mic to another room and have other discussions, because this is uncomfortable, it's making everyone nervous. Yeah, so those are the critical things, I think, as a society we need to ask. And it doesn't just sit with one person, it sits with all of us. How do we educate ourselves about how to become more inclusive? Because inclusion just doesn't end by looking at a community or looking at a woman or a man or a child, or there's so many dynamics and different things to look at when you're saying inclusion, and it's up to us to really take the initiative to educate ourselves, to understand what that means, and to be more proactive in how we are approaching it, having more open and transparent discussions with the people that we're collaborating with the people that we're working with, be a lot more intentional about some of the systems and the structures that we're looking to create, and also be ready to disrupt those systems and structures. Sometimes that's what it means to be inclusive. It's to look at something and say, this is just completely wrong. Let's bring that down and reconstruct again. Let's build this house again and bring more voices and bring more people, the people that we are working with, in to help us reconstruct and remodel a new house that we can all share and live in.
Wow, wow, that's very profound. I love your perspective on that. And I was recently at a Women in Conservation Forum organized by the Ma Trust, and it was just women, and they had this session about inclusive governance, community engagement, and leadership. And it was, I think, 3 men and 1 woman on the panel. I was in the panel as well, and it was very hot. Everyone was asking, where are the men in conservation? And they were telling
Yeah.
us, you guys should also go and start your own forum. And I was like, no, we need to bring men in this space as well, so that they can also understand your perspectives, and
Mm.
communicate in a way that is respectful, that is honoring, all these gender roles, disruption in gender roles. The Maasai society is largely patriarchal, women speaking, women who are knowledgeable, women who are empowered. We kind of feel scared sometimes as men, but I feel like it's time to start having these conversations and bring everyone in the room, really. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. I agree with you. It's really hard to shift the gender narrative when it's just, women alone in the room or just men alone in the room. It's not very effective. You kind of need everybody to be there contributing and understanding each other's perspectives.
Absolutely. You've pursued both a master's in philosophy from Cambridge and an MBA in conservation leadership. How have these experiences shaped your approach to leadership and decision making?
Oh, okay. Well, they're both very different and both very important at the same time. So the MBA in conservation leadership is built upon my business background. And for me at the time, it was a perfect setting because then it allowed me to bring business together with conservation in a way that very few institutions actually do. So that was the pursuit that I had at the Africa Leadership University. And I really enjoyed my time there because the Africa Leadership University is also very centered on building a very strong leadership components tailored for African leaders. So during my time there, I really learned a lot about, different countries across the African continent, the challenges and the opportunities that exist. And I also really got challenged in terms of how we are approaching leadership. There's a leadership component that the course has that is intense, and you do it for the entire duration of the course. And each term, you're just asked really difficult questions that you have to sit with and marinate, and you really reflect a lot on who you are as a leader and how you're showing up in different spaces. So I enjoyed my time there, and I enjoyed the people that I was in class with. I think they really helped me open up my mind to different things that I hadn't considered before. And that kind of also now led me down to the route to the MPhil in Cambridge. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a curious individual who's quite restless, quite easily. And so once I got a taste of what's happening in Africa, I was like, what is happening in the rest of the world then? And the MPhil in Cambridge ticked all the boxes for me again because it's tailored for leaders from the global south, from all parts of the world actually, to come together and to discuss leadership challenges from a global scale. And it's been fantastic. It's been challenging. I have learned a lot. My curiosity has now reached peak. Really reading up and really trying to understand different dimensions of conservation that I hadn't grasped before. But now I'm beginning to appreciate that, is something to pay attention to, especially on a global scale. So those two experiences have been incredible in really helping me understand, and I would like to say expand my language beyond what I had the privilege of doing and working under during my time in the Mara. Now I'm able to understand and contribute to discussions beyond that, which is what I wanted for myself.
Wow. And looking back, Rosebell, 10 years ago and now, just coming into conservation, no background in conservation, very fresh into this field. That mind shift, do you ever sit down and think, wow, we, how is this even possible? Have you had those moments before?
Uh, Sometimes I do. Sometimes I think, okay, Rosebell, like a lot of these things that you're doing are a bit all over the place. But then at the heart of it, I feel like I've always been doing the same thing. And for me, it's the people. I've always just put people at heart. 10 years ago, I was not in conservation. I was working in a health startup, I think, and working with people from underprivileged backgrounds to be able to access healthcare. And I think that consistency of looking at, who are the people in the community sector who are not able to attain certain resources, who are not able to contribute, who are not able to make decisions. Who are they, and how can we get them into the rooms that they need to be? How can we, help them be more visible? Let them speak. Let people know that they exist. Let them know the value that they bring to the community. Having those kind of discussions, I think, is what has always driven me across everything that I do. And in that way, I find the consistency, despite, what some would consider a very big transition for me. I'm like, it kind of makes sense.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. For young people listening to you right now, especially young women who really want to make a difference but feel overwhelmed, when you turn on the news, it's negative news, a hurricane here, someone stabbed someone there, there's a political figure disturbing their people there, conservation becoming this far and thing that you think, how will I ever get there? What's one step they can take to begin with, and what are some of the things or some of the ways they can start tapping into networks, conferences, events, LinkedIn? What are some of the things that worked for you, and some of the things that you've identified now that young people can really tap into and make a tangible difference in this space?
My inspiration actually came from Beyonce.
Wow.
There's a documentary Beyonce did a few years ago. I think it was Four. I think the documentary is called Four. And she was focusing on, coming out under her father's wing and now starting to become her own person and manage her own entity and all of that. And in the documentary, she said something very profound, which stuck with me, which was always bet on yourself, bet on yourself. And I sat down and I asked myself, what does betting on myself mean? And betting on yourself means, sitting down and imagining the kind of life that you want and saying, I am going to bet on myself to get that kind of life. And what does that mean? Sometimes it means, maybe you need to get into shape. Sometimes it means maybe you need to go back to school. Sometimes it means, maybe you have to relocate and go to other places, just thinking very critically about what you want your life to be. First, just really understand for yourself. Don't try to compare yourself to other people, because that's a trap a lot of people fall into, is that, oh, I want Diplex life because Diplex looks like he's having sand right now in the Mara. So I want to be where Diplex is. But you have no
Yeah,
idea what Diplex is going through, right? So
exactly.
in first, stay in your lane and really, really understand who you are as a person, what your strengths are, and what you want for yourself in your life. Once you have that clarity, then become bold about it. Don't sit back, and really, really get out of a victim mentality, which is huge, because I find that's a huge thing that a lot of people suffer from today. We always look at somebody else and go like, oh, so and so owes me this. They should hire me. They should give me this opportunity. Nobody owes you anything. And it's a very painful reality, but the moment you accept it, it frees you in a way that you cannot imagine. Understanding and stepping away from the victim mentality and saying, nobody owes me anything, but then I need to try and do my best capacity, my best capability. How can I pursue? How can I push? How can I get the things that I want? And then I think also being able to be vocal about your dreams. As I started going up in my career, one of the things that I wasn't prepared for was being in the room with significant decision makers who one day will turn and look at you and say, you're very interesting. You're in this room. What is your name and what do you want in this room? And then you have no answer, because you're just used to being a flower girl there and looking cute and serving people tea and whatever. And one day somebody's like, no, I actually want to know who you are. Like, what are your ambitions and all of that? And then coming up blank, which is the worst thing, because a lot of the time when those opportunities present themselves, especially with those kind of people, the moment you drop the ball, and you just come up blank, then their interest wanes. They're like, okay, this person doesn't even know what they want, and then they shift and they move on. So I quickly learned that I need to have an answer. I need to be bold about who I am and why I'm in the room and what I need. And I've learned to just be very open about some of the things that I'm doing. Africa tradition has this very horrible thing of keep everything under wraps, secret. Like wrap it and keep it under, and then like
Yeah,
when you've been doing it for like 6 months is now when you announce
exactly.
like, yeah, by the
Hey
way,
guys,
this
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 is
has
what I've
been
done.
going on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and fine, sometimes I can understand the need to keep things under wraps, but then sometimes also that's what inhibits us from accessing some of these opportunities. Understand the room you're going to walk in. Not every room is for you. So don't pursue every room, because not every room is for you, and that's fine. Or sometimes you will walk into a room and maybe the people in the room are also just not, it's not gelling, it's not flowing. That's fine. That's okay. You can walk out of the room and say, maybe that room is just not for me. But be intentional also about your networks, because sometimes when people talk about networking, it's very interesting and curious. Because now let me speak as a former marketer. you have seen people say they're networking and go to all sorts of very interesting places. And I sit down and ask myself, are you really sure you're going to get any value within that space or within that room? What exactly is your intention there? And you see people going and doing one or two things, which is okay, but you don't really get any value. Or you see some people overextending. Because I've also attended networking events where there's someone who just has business cards and is dishing it to everyone every
Mm-hmm.
time, by the time they're done, they've dished it out to 100 people. And I'm like, how effective is this really? Because you're not going to remember 100 people who you met in under an hour. So for me, I've become more intentional about joining spaces where I meet a lot of like-minded people. And because I want, the intention that I set for myself at an early point was that I want to be with original thinkers. I want to be with people who see the world in a very different way. Then I try to identify, where do these people hang out? Who are they in society and what are they doing? And I follow some of them on Instagram. And by following them on Instagram, you find out the places they hang out. And, I join those kind of spaces, and you start interacting with those kinds of people. And when I join an event, I'm an introvert by nature, so I'm not trying to talk to even 10 people. Even five is just too much. So I target like three people, two, three genuine conversations, and I try to have those at minimum whenever I'm going to an event, and connect with people there, and slowly just build it up and not over extrain myself. But I believe in networking with quality over quantity. So really just being able to set up really, really good relationships within the time that I've had. And then also recognizing who to share my dreams and my aspirations with. You shouldn't also just go and tell everyone what it is that you're planning to do, or where you're planning to go. Not everyone has good intentions for you. So having the discernment to understand when to speak up in the room and share your vision, and also when to keep quiet and listen to when people are speaking, is also quite critical. Yeah.
Powerful, powerful nuggets there. I mean, I hope our listeners are taking notes, because you've really shared it all. Thank you very much, Rosebell. Finally, when you think about the future, what does a sustainable and just world look like through your eyes?
A sustainable and just world is where everybody is contributing and everybody has a say, and that is from the grandmother in the village to the young girl who has gone to university and is able to speak. It is from the young boy who's going to fetch water to the old man who seated down with his sons, allocating land and divisions and everything. Regardless of where you're from, your background, and the color of your skin, and what you look like, and how you've been raised up, you're able and you feel confident, and you feel that you have the space to raise your voice, to contribute towards the discussion, and that can be taken seriously. That is not just a checkbox, but it's actually being taken seriously, and you're being listened to, and people are engaging you in that way. For me, that would be the future that I think we should all aspire to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll just jump right into the bonus rapid fire round. Quick
Mhm.
4 questions before we wrap it up, Doris. So I ask and then you shoot the answer
Okay.
real quick. One word that describes your leadership style?
Thoughtful. Thoughtful.
Powerful.
Thoughtful. Mhm.
What's a book or quote that has guided your journey?
I'm going to paraphrase it. It's a quote by Cheryl Strayed. You don't have a right to the cards you've been dealt with, but you have an obligation to play the hell out of the cards that you've been given.
That's
I love it.
that's quite something. What's the most powerful lesson the land has taught you?
The land will heal you. The land will heal you, and that is why we need to be stewards, because we are all connected, one way or the other. And I have been through situations that have been dark, and that have been terrible, and that have been difficult, and nature has always just found a way of healing me and bringing me back to myself in a way that nothing has. So the land will heal you, and so when you respect the land, when you take care of the land, it will also take care of you.
Wow, wow, that's very profound. Thank you, Rosbella. I'll ask this in a two-part. If you could send one message to global leaders in 2025, what will it be? And if you could send one message to young people in 2025, what will it be?
To global leaders, this is a difficult one, but to global leaders, I would say less talk and more action. I think there's a lot of talking that happens um, in different spaces across the world, and it's great. And we have a lot of documents and policies and all of these things, but none of these things are speaking to each other. None of these things are being connected. We write a lot of beautiful documents that nobody reads. It's time for us to start becoming more intentional about some of the things that we're doing and connecting the dots. And really, really being critical in our thinking about what the future of mankind looks like, not thinking about it from the perspective of the next 5 years or 10 years, but really thinking about down the line of what will generations of our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, what are they going to inherit through the work that we are doing right now? To the young people, I will encourage them to be very bold and to be very, very audacious. I cannot say this enough. I was actually thinking about this, I think yesterday, and I was wondering, in my 20s, did I do enough? I feel like, I was like, did I take it too slow? Should I have done more? Should I have done this? The world is your oyster. And I don't think young people understand that enough. That it is okay for you to be young and to have nothing. Take risks, mess up. I encourage you to mess up completely, do the most ridiculous things. There will be people willing to hold you back and help you back on your feet. As you get older, those opportunities shrink and become a lot less. And you find that people are also a lot less graceful to you as you get older. You're expected to have found your way and have established yourself. So when you're younger, take those risks. Ask, knock on doors, be bold, be ambitious, go for it. You have all the energy, so don't spend your time sleeping and doing, weird, strange things. Like really, really try and be constructive with the time that you have and just go for it completely. These are your best years, and it will change your life in a way that you can't imagine.
There you have it, folks. Go for it. Go for it. What a guest. What a conversation. Powerful voice, passionate voice, and a great woman who is doing great things. Asante sana, Rosebell, for coming to the Boots on the Ground podcast and sharing your insights.
All right. Thank you, Diplex. Been my pleasure. Bye.